Hey Jordan, I just want to start off with why do you think Gen Z will never be able to retire?
The main issue is inflation is a compounding force, right? Because the percentage of the money supply is always increasing. It's never really decreasing, right? So once you have begin to inflate the money supply from like the 1930s, right, when we got off the gold standard, really in 1971, that's why you can go on that website. WTF happened in 1971. That's really when we started going off the rails. So the compounding effects of inflation have gotten to the point where now people are realizing, wait, something's wrong. They can't exactly pinpoint what that thing is, but people are realizing something is wrong with the economy, with our society, and people are finding this in their everyday life, whether it's being able to afford less at the grocery store, having the inability to, you know, cer cer- do their car payment, their housing, right? Their cost of housing, the cost of rent, all these different metrics are becoming out of reach for so many people. And this is more and more true for Gen Z and for Gen Alpha, right? Because the compounding of the debt has gotten bigger than any other time in history. So Gen Zers and Gen Alpha feel the brunt of that inflationary effect. And that's the reason why I think, for the most part, they're not going to be able to retire because you mean it's too much for them to handle, and wages are not increasing at the rate of inflation.
Yeah, and I think one of the bigger problems is also that they start off with almost the same wage as what their parents started off at, or people even maybe like just the previous generation. So, for example, minimum wage in the US has been 7.25 since 1990 or something crazy like that. I don't know what the years, maybe 2003 or something for
Yeah,
a very
something
long
crazy.
time.
Yes.
It's been $7.25, I believe, for a very
Yeah.
long time. So what that means is that people who started their careers back then and people who start their careers today, they're starting off at the same level, but then the I guess the hurdle to buy a house has just grown and grown and grown. So that's why Gen Z, Gen Alpha are just getting screwed over.
Yeah. And there's certainly going to be people who are able to put more specific numbers to what you just said. But to give like a crude or like rough estimate, essentially you have to think of money as time. All right. That's where we get that saying, time is money. You go to work for a certain amount of hours, right? You give a certain amount of your life and your time in order to gain economic value. The difference between today and the past is, let's say in 1940, you were able to give, let's call it 1,000 hours. Like, let's call it 1,000 hours of working. That was enough to afford you a down payment, for a really good house, right? That's minimum wage. Today's minimum wage, the amount of hours you'd have to put in is probably a lot closer to 5, 6, 7,000 hours to do a down payment on a similar house, right? So you have to work literally 5 to even 10 times harder in order to acquire a good that was given to someone for a lot less work. And there's going to come a point where um, essentially the amount of work that you're putting in, you don't have enough time. You don't have enough hours in a day to be an owner. And that's where we get, the World Economic Forum, where they're talking about stuff like, oh, you will own nothing and be happy, right? It's because you're going to be a renter because you won't have enough economic value. You don't have enough purchasing power to be an owner. And that's where I see
That's
this going.
exactly what it is, yeah. Oh, I
Yeah.
completely agree. So the way that I see it, what Bitcoin is going to do is it's going to, especially for so I'm millennial. I'm a millennial. I'm
Mhm.
32. How old are you? You're 20?
25.
25. Okay, okay. So your generation, I guess even 5 to 10 years after you, people are going
Yeah.
to really see the benefit of what it feels like to live on a Bitcoin standard just because we were talking before we started recording what you were saying how younger generations are used to living online. They're used to
Yeah.
saving online, they're used to building all of their wealth online, and it's essentially like starting a brand new game of Monopoly,
hmm
right? And now everybody is starting from scratch. Everybody gets 200 when they hit go. Everybody or when they reach go, everybody can buy the exact same amount of Bitcoin for the exact same amount of money. Of course, there are going to be people who are earlier, some people who are later, but I feel like what's going to happen is, let's say for somebody who's 20, somebody who's 15, if their parents were to save 0.01 Bitcoin for them, I think by the time they're 30, 35, they're going to be able to buy a house with it. Maybe even pay a down payment for it. for that house, if not have it worth more. But what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's just so much to unpack with Bitcoin, especially if you're just getting started in the space. But people who have been in it a little bit deeper, you might be able to grasp this crazy statement that I'm about to make a little bit better. And that statement is that Bitcoin will always be cheap as long as it is denominated and buyable with fiat. And the reason why I say that is you are trading an infinite asset for a limited asset. All right. Another way to put it is you're not buying Bitcoin, you're selling your fiat, right? You're selling your US dollars. And as long as someone is willing to accept dollars for Bitcoin, I believe it'll always be cheap, just given the fact that it represents a um an economic value point. It's a point in time that cannot be diluted. You know what I mean? It cannot be eroded. It really is digital gold in the sense that it is not going to erode in its purchasing power. It only becomes more valuable. I believe in the future there's going to be a point where people have to pay, who have to work. You will only be able to work for Satoshis. And then when that time comes, Bitcoin will truly be expensive because now we're in a hyper Bitcoinized world. But really quickly to touch on the Gen Z thing and how we're so used to digital assets, Gen Alpha and Gen Z, they're online so much, and they already trade economic value for digital commodities, right? If you talk to a younger person about a Fortnite skin that they paid money for, if you try telling them, well, it's not real, that doesn't, that literally does not make sense to them, especially. And in a way, the skin is real. Like it just exists in a different medium. It's just a digital outfit, right? It is a digital costume that your character can wear, and that represents something that shows other people something. And you have to pay a little bit of value in order to acquire that. They already understand the importance of digitized um, assets and digitized commodities. So the transition from paper money to digital money will be really seamless, especially for younger people who probably won't even have a bank account. People born today probably will not have a bank account when they're 20.
Yeah, I think the banks are just adding more and more uh barriers to opening a bank account. They're making it a little bit more difficult. They want more ID. They want you to be a certain age. I mean, with Bitcoin, there's no discrimination. Anybody can save in Bitcoin as long as you can create a wallet on the internet. You can save in Bitcoin, and your parents can do that for you. You can do that for yourself. You can buy a wallet. You can do it however you want to. But I mean, there's no discrimination. So I think what a lot of people are going to do, I think this is actually something that millennials will probably start. Give me your thoughts on this. So the way that I see it, I think millennials are going to actually, you know how children get an allowance, they get a certain amount of money every single week, every single month, whatever.
Yes.
I think millennials are going to give it in Bitcoin because they know for a fact that their kid is going to need it in the future. And plus, you can just do it within your own household. You don't need to give them cash. You don't need to rely on the government. I think millennials are the ones that are really figuring out and are at the age of having kids. So I think they'll start that. I think at that generation, it'll be like, wow, this thing is never going away. This is my savings for life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the millennials are the ones who are starting to walk, right? So that the Gen Zers like me can start to run, and then the Gen Alpha
Exactly.
can sprint. You know what I mean? It's all about laying a foundation. They're just laying the roadwork. And I believe his name is Robin something. I'll have
Robin
to.
Sire.
Yeah, Robin Sire. Yes. Also a great interviewer. He just did an interview with like a 13-year-old who was super big into Bitcoin. She thought that Bitcoin was like the standard of money that people transacted on because her parents use Bitcoin so often. But only
Well,
after she talked to more people in the real world, she realized, oh wait, no one really accepts Bitcoin currently. That's so weird. Why would they do that? Like why would they not use it? To her
yeah.
that doesn't make sense, you know? And it's just about the culture, right? Being able to break the idea that money is this one certain type of thing is really hard to overcome, especially on a societal basis. Because as a Bitcoiner, in a way, you're kind of an outcast. You're a little bit ostracized uh, currently. We're kind of moving away from that more and more as more adoption happens. But if you go to a restaurant and you're the only one trying to pay in Bitcoin, you're the odd man out, right? At this moment. but I believe we're slowly transitioning away from that, and that's just the adoption curve. I guarantee you, people who were the first ones to start using credit cards and debit cards and stuff like that, they were the odd ones out because the infrastructure might not have been laid out everywhere at that time. But now it's really easy to do that. So I think it's just about time, right? Adoption, time, and infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think the time is the most important part because it takes what 3, 4 years to really understand this. I mean, it's some for some people it takes less, some people it takes more. It took me like 4 years to really get it. I didn't get it before that. It took me
Yeah,
4 years. It took me 3 years of studying, and then in August, I think in August of 2023, it finally clicked. Like, oh, I get it now. But it takes
yeah,
time, right? So if anybody starts studying it today, I don't think they'll be able to, I don't think they'll truly get it until the next bull market, so 2028. Because you have
yeah,
to go through a market, you have to go through a cycle, right? I think that's key. I didn't understand that before. Now I understand it. I understand that, oh, it's gonna come down, it's gonna go back up, it's gonna come down, go back up. Make sure that your cash flows are fine. As long as you can understand all that stuff, I think you're great. I think you're doing pretty well. So piggybacking on your other topic of the 13-year-old saying that she didn't understand that people didn't use Bitcoin. Whenever I go to, let's say, an event, a restaurant, some kind of like a sports event, whatever it is, I try to see, I try to think, how many people here actually understand Bitcoin? What do you think the
yeah.
number of those are? Like, let's say out of 20,000 people, if you go to a random sporting event in the US. Are you in the US?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, in the US. So what do you think the percentage there is? How many people do you think own Bitcoin in that sporting event? Let's say out of 20,000 people.
It's really hard to say. I would say global adoption is around 2 to 3%. And
Two
when
or
we
three,
get to the
okay.
United States, I think it's actually smaller in the United States. And the reason why I would say that, let's call it a 2%, 1.5 to 2%. And the reason I say that is Americans actually have some of the least incentive to be on a Bitcoin network. And I even have a video talking about this. Like, why is American government so much slower to adopting Bitcoin type policy? And that's because they own the global reserve currency at the moment, right? They have so much power and influence that they might not be so willing to give it up easily. And when it comes to countries in the global south, some countries in Africa, different countries in Europe, these countries are a lot more likely to use Bitcoin because they don't have the global reserve currency. They've already been massively debased by their governments. They're being bullied by the IMF, right? They're getting all these predatory loans and they are looking for an exit out of the system, right? And they see Bitcoin as that avenue. So I believe if you're talking about a stadium of 20,000, there might be, 5% invested in crypto, but just pure Bitcoiners who really understand the protocol, I would say less than 200 people.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. So I was actually just going based on what you were saying about the global south. I went to Argentina not too long ago. Um, I
Yeah.
was I just went there for a vacation and at the time, so this was like 2 weeks ago. At the time, this exchange rate was around 1300. Now it's back to 1140. So it's fluctuating like crazy. It doesn't seem like it's very volatile, like just based on this number. I mean, 1.27% in a day is absolutely insane. But
No,
over the
that's
last like
insane.
it's crazy because what this is if you were to go there as an American and you want to give away your US dollars, they'll give you this amount of money and then they'll give you their own rate. So they'll give you like 1,110 US pesos per US dollar. But if you were to go to a bank, the banks don't even acknowledge the inflation. So this is the rate that the banks will give you. So or this between these two rates. So 955 and 995 or 973 and 976. They won't even acknowledge this rate. But the citizens, they realize that this is the inflation rate. They've figured out that they shouldn't hold pesos because pesos are so abundant. They're not worth anything. They can be printed out of thin air, meaning that they want to hold dollars. So I think these countries, like you said, they're going to be the ones that are going to want to own Bitcoin at some point, and they're going to be the ones who are going to need to own Bitcoin because Bitcoin protects their purchasing power. In the US, I mean, people don't really care as much. They don't even think that the US dollar is losing value. I think in other countries they kind of realize it there because their inflation is so much faster.
Yes, yes. And an analogy I like to use with this is like to think about eggs, right? So the price of eggs, everyone's always talking about the price of eggs. Um, Eggs have not changed from 1950 to now. If they have changed a little bit, maybe there's a little bit more probiotics, but more steroids in the eggs. But if anything, the eggs have gotten bigger, so you're getting more egg per carton, right? So we are better at producing eggs because our factory farming has become more efficient. We can more easily produce a huge volume of eggs, right? Compared to like one farmer with just one cow and one plow or whatever, one little chicken coop. So even though we're producing more eggs, the price of eggs has skyrocketed significantly. So you have to reframe the way you think about certain products because the eggs are still the same. They come from chickens. They're just eggs. It's the pieces of paper that are changing, right? So before I could go to the farmer, I give him one piece of paper for one egg. But now I have to give him 10 pieces of paper. He gives me the same egg, and that's just because the paper has become more abundant. It is less rare. It is holding less value. And people, they have a hard time kind of framing their mentality in that way to look at stuff in that way. Instead, what we're seeing, especially from politicians, right? All these debates. This is why I hate watching like Kamala and Trump and all these guys talk about, all the stuff that doesn't really matter. Yeah, we have important issues in the country, but no one wants to touch the economy thing, right? And when they do, what's the issue in the economy? Well, this guy, I don't know how exactly, but he's making the economy bad. Like, really? It's a greater issue than these guys want to touch on. And that's because they're in the pockets of the central banks.
It's just a game of pointing fingers. That's pretty much it at this point. I don't think they plan to change anything just because in a way, I mean, if anything, they could easily be taking money under the table, keep
Yeah,
doing all the stuff that's happening, right? And they benefit from it. So I like showing this website, the US debt clock. Last time I was on this website, the number was at like $35.2 trillion
yeah.
dollars. And that was only a few days ago. Now it's at $35.6 trillion dollars, meaning that they printed $500 billion dollars. $500 billion dollars in just a few days. They borrowed, not printed. They borrowed,
Like I see the vision. Like I understand what you're
right?
saying, and I hope that's being
Yeah,
translated to the people watching. Because like when you print money, to quote Jack Mallers, who's going to realize the loss? Right?
yeah,
When you have debt and an obligation, a unpaid liability, unfunded liability, right? Who's going to realize the loss? Like who's going to actually make the payment? And the payment
yeah,
is done kind of indirectly. It's kind of done in a sneaky way, and it's done by you. Everybody
yeah,
who's watching, who's working, who pays taxes, who is a part of the United States economy. You actually foot the bill with
yeah.
higher prices.
I finally got the calculation done. So essentially, they borrowed $500 billion dollars. If you were making $20 per hour, they would have stolen 25, 25 billion hours from you, which is just absolutely insane to even think about. And then because they did it in just a few days, they've stolen 24 hours each from 1.04 billion people. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
and that's literally insane. I saw another stat from Swan Bitcoin. If you were to make $500,000 per day since the pyramids were built,
Oh yeah, I've
let's just
seen
say that
this.
was about 5,000 years ago, right? 6,000 years ago, you would still have not made more money today than the United States government has printed since January of this year, right?
Yeah,
Of this year. Not even mentioning COVID, right? COVID, that was insane amount of this channel's not getting monetized now because I said that word. Sorry. But you know what I mean? Like it's insane. It's absolutely insane how much money's been printed just in the last 4 years. And that's why if you want to really see the rate of inflation, look at the price of a Caniac 4 years ago. Look at the price of a car that you want from 4 years ago. Look at the price of housing 4 years ago. All these things have transitioned so much. And it's not because all these guys are just genius investors or something. Like if you have a house and you're like, oh, look how rich I'm getting in my house. No, your house is appreciating against the dollar. The dollar is losing value against your house. That's another concept. Like a lot of the stuff we're talking about is concepts that require you to reframe the way you see and think about money.
yeah. That's it. Once you start seeing the way that things truly are, I think it becomes a no-brainer that Bitcoin is, I mean, it's the future essentially. There's no way for if you don't understand why the money is a problem, then you're not going to understand why Bitcoin is the solution. I think that's essentially it. I actually want to
Great line.
share I want to
Really great.
share a meme that I found on online here. So a lot of real estate investors, they just think that they've been great at timing the market, but it's
Yeah.
inflation that's getting them all of their gains. So let's say a house that's worth what, $10 million today, it was maybe worth $5 million, $4 million a few years ago. It's not like the value of the house has gone up. It's that the amount of
Right.
money that's chasing the house is going up. And over time, I think the only reason why, right now, I mean, the only reason why people even buy houses, like let's say there's hedge funds, there's um, financial institutions that are buying as many houses as they can. There are real investors that are buying as many houses as they can, right? And they're doing it because they need to store their wealth.
Yeah.
If they didn't need to hold those houses in the place of the dollar, if the dollar didn't lose so much of its value, they wouldn't have to hold houses. They would get rid of those houses, right? And I think that's where Gen Z is getting hurt. I think that's part of why Gen Z is never going to retire because another generation is using Gen Z's basic human needs to make profits.
Yeah. And yeah, to circle back towards like Gen Zers and Gen Alpha, um, when you think about the steps that your parents and your grandparents were taking, it was like you work your job, you go to university, you get a education, then you move on to get a good job. That one job, this is a really important key. I want to focus on this as well. Maybe not in this interview, but I just want to touch on it. Back in the day, obviously it only took one income to supplement a family, right? Typically, one average income. It's not like all these stay-at-home moms and these single breadwinner fathers were just like all CEOs and millionaires. They had a shift at the factory, right? And that shift at the factory, that shift at the plant was enough to supplement the income and the needs of a wife, two kids, and a little doggy, right? And you had a house and your picket fence and everything was cool. To try to do that today is extremely difficult. And I think another struggle Gen Z faces, right, is the declining birth rate, right? Declining fertility rate, the lack of kids that people are having, right? And why is that happening? Well, why would I have kids if I have no money for anything, right? I don't want to bring another person into the world when I have nothing to give them, right? Some people don't even have their own space. They're gonna have kids while they live in their parents' house. That doesn't really make sense to a lot of people, you know? So what we're seeing is a crumbling of a lot of our traditional roles in society. Whether women like this or not, most of them will have to work until they die. You know what I mean? If you're a Gen Z woman, you're going to have to work for a really long time. And there's some people who don't like that. There's some people who look back at a time where, they could work if they want to, but they don't have to. Now you have to do this just to barely scrape by. And I think that's truly insane, right? So when it comes to education, the price of tuition's gone up, and I would say the value of your education's gone down. All right, the value of a degree has gone down. You can literally look at this. This is statistically true. Healthcare. This is another one people don't really talk about too often. Healthcare is like 10 times more expensive today, right? If
Mhm.
you get put in an ambulance, like against your will, and then they go work on you or whatever, you're gonna wake up with a crazy bill most likely, and you might not be able to get out of that hole. You might have to file bankruptcy. And all these different steps in life that we're taking, home ownership, car ownership, starting a family, they're just getting further and further out of reach because the amount of dollars you need to acquire in order to obtain those goals is getting bigger, but your wage is not increasing. So it's a hard hurdle to overcome for sure.
And
And
even
that's why
so no, go ahead, go ahead.
I mean that's why we're trying to find something that's beating essentially the hurdle rate. We're trying to find something that beats the rate of inflation. We're trying to find something that supplements our income so that we can increase our standard of living. And that's where we find Bitcoin. But yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to actually touch on the topic that you were mentioning about the birth rates. So the birth rates, I think it's key to understand why that's even happening. I saw a couple of stats on Twitter. that were showing just a bunch of a bunch of years where the birth rate has just been decreasing and decreasing and decreasing, and it'll probably just keep decreasing. That's the scary part because uh, younger generations, like you said, they have no money. They can't afford to pay for the basic needs. They can't afford to pay for their own basic needs. So this is the chart that I saw. They can't afford to pay for their own basic needs. This is from 1901 till 2024. The Even in the Great Depression, the numbers weren't so bad. Like
Yeah.
that's just crazy to me, right? Even during the Great Depression, the numbers weren't so bad. So now things are just getting worse and worse because younger generations have no reason to. How are they even going to afford to pay for their kids, right? You can't afford to pay for your kids unless you have a great salary. All the great salaries are taken over by baby boomers who can't afford to pay for their own expenses. All the great and people are working longer and longer and longer just to make ends meet. So the younger generations can't take on those jobs. So younger generations are missing out completely. And this is just going to keep getting worse. This
Yeah.
is this is going to go into the negatives at one point because baby boomers are going to be dying in mass, right? So many of them are going to be dying all at once, and this number is just going to keep decreasing. This is a year-over-year change in the US population. Over time, this is going to go negative because so many people aren't going to, I mean, over the next 10, 15 years, I think the population is going to decrease significantly. So I also think if you look at this chart, I think it also shows you that legacy assets are probably going to face some trouble because legacy assets like real estate, they rely on the population increasing constantly. Like single family homes, residential real estate, it relies on more and more people wanting to buy homes. If more people don't want to buy homes, prices start dropping. If prices start dropping, people start defaulting. If people start defaulting, banks have to foreclose on a ton of homes, and banks aren't trying to hold on to houses. They want the free income that interest generates for them. So they're going to start dumping houses. I mean, at the end of it, it's like you said, we have to find something new. We have to find something that can actually fix the system and gets rid of a lot of the problems that we have. And a lot of the politicians haven't even acknowledged it yet. So,
Yeah. And when it comes to, again, a collapse in the older generation, not just the housing market being in trouble, the bond market's already currently in trouble, right?
yeah.
And who's really buying bonds? It's a lot of older people, right? So a lot of their retirement is in bonds and treasuries or whatever. No one's really going to want that toxic sludge. You know what I mean? No one's going to want to put their money in CDs. A CD stands for Certificate of Depreciation, right? Because it's literally less than the inflation rate. Like, why would you want that? All people really, what they're transitioning to is trying to gamble in cryptos or in the stock market because that's the only way they can try to beat the rate of inflation. So, in a society where your money holds no value, you're kind of incentivized to spend to get rid of it, which turns you into a speculator. So you have to try to guess what stock is going to go up. You have to try to guess what crypto is going to go to the moon, right? In order for you to try to preserve your purchasing power. And that's how we get so many degens, so many degenerate gamblers trying to figure out, oh, well, actually, GameStop, this is the one, bro. Or AMC, which, by the way, shout out to GameStop. That's the reason I started investing, to be fair. But I didn't get caught up in the idea or become obsessed with one stock. I moved on to something else. But people are constantly trying to chase this lottery ticket, this get rich quick scheme. But the thing I'll say about Bitcoin is it is a get rich slow scheme. It is a get rich slow scheme that involves you giving up your consumption today in order to consume more in the future, right? Because you are absorbing more of the economic value every single day that you hold your own keys, right? That's
I,
basically
I
what Bitcoin
would
does every day.
I wouldn't even call it a get rich slow scheme. I would just say it's not a get rich easy scheme because there's get rich easy, there's get rich quick, there's get rich slow. I think the S&P 500 is a get rich slow scheme because you have to
Yeah.
wait 40, 45 years. I think Bitcoin is it's just money. It's you don't know when it'll because it's all just based on supply and demand, right? For all we know, let's say, for example, the next 5, 10 years, let's say we think there's going to be a bull run and we're completely wrong and Bitcoin just moves sideways. I mean, you're not going to get rich overnight, but the thing is that if you keep up with your conviction, if you keep studying, if you keep putting in the time, of course, it's not going to get you rich quickly,
Yes.
but it'll still be faster than the S&P 500.
Yes, for sure. And like if you're going off the fact that people are rational, right? Which on the whole, perhaps they're not, but on an individual level, you find more and more rational people who are going to make rational decisions in the market. And rational actors want to have the best hope of preserving their purchasing power into the future.
Yeah.
What asset does that the best? That's going to be Bitcoin. That's the reason why, we're not just up here talking about Bitcoin because we want to complain about the economy and be like, oh, we're victims. Oh, I'm crying. I'm crying. No, like we actually want to have a solution. We're talking about the solution. We're talking about how this works and how this helps you to achieve the things that you might want to aspire to in life, right? And if you're really watching this and listening to this, and maybe this is your first cycle, and you might think all this sounds a little bit crazy, you do just have to have some patience, right? Because past performance is not enough for future expectations, right? But if you understand the underlying principles of Bitcoin, which require you to understand the underlying principles of money and economics and all these different things, all these different disciplines, you'll see as we go into the future, more people want to be a part of this network, not the network that is centrally controlled by one node. That's the Federal Reserve, controlled by one node that can print money for no value. It takes no work for them to print money. However, to produce a Bitcoin, you have to show proof of your work. And that's why one of the many reasons it has so much value, really.
Yeah, and the proof of the work is what I mean, that's the Bitcoin. That's the coins that you get in the Coinbase transaction. That's the proof of work of the work that you did to create that block, to the 10 minutes of energy that you used, the resources that you consumed, the time that you put in, the investment. That's the powerful thing here. I think the because the old system is proof of stake, it just concentrates wealth with the older people or anybody who really has been working for a very long time. So if you just hold on to a house, you're going to keep getting richer and richer and richer.
Yep. Yep. Essentially, like the current system uh rewards people. Like imagine you're climbing up a mountain, right? It's a really rigid mountain. It's really hard to get up there. But once you make it, essentially you're allowed to coast downhill, right? And that's essentially what the fiat system is. You're able to work a couple hours. This is more true in the past, not so much now. But before you work a couple minimum wage hours, you get your house, and then your house essentially appreciates in value a huge amount against the dollar, right?
Yeah.
Your stocks, you started investing, let's say you started investing back in like the 1970s, 1980s. The stocks that you bought, especially if you just bought the S&P or the NASDAQ or whatever, you're way up. And now you're just allowed to coast. You can live off of your investments. You can live off your dividends. You can live off whatever. This is why the rich get richer and the broke get poorer. All right. Because
Yeah.
once you already have a little bit of wealth acquired, you can use your wealth to generate more. Whether that's through, reinvesting, or in a way, you can siphon wealth away from other people by buying multiple properties and then using that as a way to create yield, to generate income, right? You're using a house that you don't need because you're not living in it, but you're having someone else basically supplement your lifestyle by paying you
Right.
every
That
so
that's exactly it. Yeah. And you can keep doing that over and over and over again. You can keep doing it pretty much forever. And houses are, I think the thing that governments are really focusing on is artificially decreasing the supply of housing. They're like, for example, I was looking at a stat where it showed something like 15 million houses in the US are unoccupied.
yeah, yeah, there's a lot of vacant houses.
Right. So if let's say those houses, if whoever the owner is got charged a massive tax and they just own an act. I mean, if governments really wanted to solve the problem of housing, they would, in Canada, for example, they charge you a 1% vacancy tax. A 1% tax isn't going to stop anybody from
Yeah,
selling they're not going to sell it. It's not going to stop anybody from getting rid of their house because if you pay that 1%, you're still getting a benefit over just holding cash.
yeah, and they're probably making 20% anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Exactly. right? So if they really wanted to bump people out, I mean, I think it's just them getting their own cut, right? It's a cartel getting its cut out of the sales essentially. But if they really wanted to cut people out, if they really wanted to stop people from owning as many houses as they possibly can, then I mean, I think the vacant tax should go up, but I mean, it doesn't seem like it incentivizes them because it doesn't seem like the right incentive because they're the ones who own houses as well. All these politicians are the ones who are landlords. They something like 40%, I was reading a stat, something like 40% of Justin Trudeau's cabinet are landlords, which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's because they are right next to the money printer. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Uh, this is called the I don't know if it was called the Vermilion effect, Cantillon.
Cantillon
Cantillon.
effect, Cantillon effect.
Yes. So essentially, the closer you are to the money printer, of course, the more power you have from the money printer. Let me give you an example. Shout out to Tuttle Twins. Tuttle Twins is a kid TV show where they talk about all sorts of stuff, but Bitcoin's one of their topics. And this is the example they gave. If we are at an amusement park, right, and every time you play a game and you win, you get one ticket. And typically the prizes cost about 2 to 3 tickets. So you got to play 2 or 3 games. You got to be pretty good. Win your tickets, go buy your stuffed animal. If someone comes over and they have a ticket printing machine, right? They're in the back of the carnival. They're like, okay, listen, man, we're going to print up 100 tickets and we're going to go buy all the little toys. All these other kids, they're working hard. They're playing games trying to get tickets. These guys are idiots. Okay. I got a ticket printing machine. They bring 100 tickets up to the booth. They start taking all the gifts, all the little teddy bears, all the stuff off the shelf, all the prizes. Now, if you're someone running the stand, you're going to be like, dude, what is happening here? Where did all these tickets come from? I'm getting wiped out. I have to raise my prices. So that way I don't get wiped out. I don't lose all my inventory. So now all of the prizes cost about 5 or 10 tickets. Now, the people who were coming around playing, right? Now they're like, dude, I got to play 10 games and I got to win all of them just to get a teddy bear. That's crazy. What's going on? I can't afford to to do anything. Like, what's happening? I have to work so much harder to get the thing that other people didn't have to work so hard to get. And that's what's happening when you're close to the money printer. You're able to inflate the prices for everyone else. And the people who are far away from the printer, who don't have a ticket printer, they just have to grind 10 times harder than they did before. So that's how you make everyone poorer by inflating the supply of currency. Same way with, being a landlord or whatever it is. If you're closer to the money printer, you have more access to capital, which lets you acquire more hard assets. Because the people with the money printer, they don't want to hold the money. Like they're trying to spend it. They don't want to hold it. They realize, wait, this is stupid. I don't want this. This is garbage. I need to buy something hard that can't be printed out of thin air. Houses can be made. You can make more of them, but it takes effort. It takes work. They are rarer than dollars. So therefore, houses are a hard asset that you trade your money for because people want hard assets more, right? There's also utility you get from a house. But the whole point is you're trying to get rid of your paper for something hard and useful. And that's what's happening in governments when you're close to the Cantillon effect. People in America,
Yeah.
all the guys trading stocks, it's insane. All these people making millions of dollars trading stocks, and they're in Congress. I think it's very interesting.
See, I don't think that investors care about the utility of houses. I don't think they care about it at all. I think all they
Oh
care
yeah,
about is the fact that they're able to keep up with inflation because of the cash flow that they're getting and because of the house price going up. If they could, if they didn't have to deal with tenants and they just got a dividend for and they got the same amount of money, of course they would love that. They don't care about the utility. What they care
yeah,
about is the fact that if they buy a house their money is going to be devalued much slower than if they just held dollars. I think that, and I think that that's the realization that's going to get a lot of people to sell their hundreds. I know people that like there are people like what is his name? Grant Cardone
Grant Cardone, yeah,
owns
Gary and
he
Grant.
owns thousands of units of homes. Why would he want to own that? Like, why would
Um,
you ever want to take the headache of owning thousands of units, regardless of what your cash flow is? Because there's so much work that goes in, there's so much time that goes in, when you can just hold Bitcoin and get a better return, at least for now. I think that's what's going to really push people to move away from stocks, push people to move away from real estate. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. As more people move away from stocks and real estate, the return from Bitcoin increases. And as the return of a Bitcoin increases, more people are incentivized to move away from stocks and real estate. And I think that's going to just keep snowballing and snowballing until it becomes this big thing that, I mean, it's going to make it so that US dollars aren't worth anything.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about value for a second. Because when I was talking about the utility value of a house, it wasn't necessarily to say that's why people are investing in
Right, right,
houses.
right.
So it's just a small factor of why a house does have value. Like houses don't just have value because of a monetary premium. That's just the majority of the value that we are attributing to them. Because a lot of anti-Bitcoiners, a lot of proponents for the opposite side are going to say, well, a house has value because you can actually do stuff with the house compared to Bitcoin.
Yeah,
You can't do anything with Bitcoin. And let me just play like a form of devil's advocate here because Bitcoin is so many different things. It's just hard to narrow it down. But yes, technically, you can't do anything with Bitcoin. And that's why it is such a great monetary good. It is a purely monetary good because you cannot do anything else with it. It's just money, right? You
yeah,
just want your money to be money. The problem with a house as money, which is what people are treating it as when you use it as an investment vehicle, you have so many different counterparty risk. You have taxes that you have to keep up on it, property tax, estate tax. There's a tax when you try to sell it.
yeah,
You have to try to upkeep the maintenance of the house. Your tenants, like you said, they might mess your house up. They might not pay for the house. The tenant itself is a counterparty risk. The state might redraw the lines within your county, and then they might say that, oh, this is actually property of the city now. They do that a lot with a lot of farmland, so any of these things are a representation of counterparty risk. Let's say gold, for instance, right? Gold has a lot of utility value. It's great for electronics. You can use it for all sorts of different stuff. It's jewelry. It's beautiful. It doesn't rust, whatever. But it does not have the great properties of money when you talk about divisibility, transferability, all this other stuff. And also, because it can be used in electronics, you don't want your money to be good for anything else except for
yeah.
money. You want a purely monetary good. That's what Bitcoin represents. Go ahead, break down this photo that I'm seeing right here. What is this disgusting fridge I'm looking at?
Let's zoom in. So this is a post from somebody on Twitter. Two guys take on real estate. Tenant, I moved out and no need for final walkthrough. Keep the deposit. How much do you think the deposit's gonna be like? 2 months rent? Maybe 1,500, $2,000?
Yeah,
And this is what they left the property at. So I mean the reason why I'm pointing this out is because when you own real estate, you have to rely on somebody else making sure that your property doesn't get destroyed. I actually commented on this post, you'll get a better return. You won't have to deal with some guy destroying your property. And I think that's absolutely true. People will keep, I don't even know who responded. There's probably some negative responses on here. But I mean, the point here is that a lot of people are so brainwashed to believe that real estate is the way to go that they don't care about the returns. They don't care about and those are the people that are going to get burned, right? Those are the people that are going to get really badly hurt because let's say, for example, these people, they have this property and it's worth, I'm just putting a random number there, $500,000 today. You can buy
yeah,
what, like 7 Bitcoin with that money? Six, seven
yeah,
Bitcoin, whatever the
yeah,
amount is, seven, maybe 8 Bitcoin
yeah.
in let's say this property value appreciates by 10% because of all the risk that you have to take from owning a property. Um, you have to pay for things and this 9K, who even knows that this person is going to get their 9K bill paid by the tenant? If somebody's
Right.
leaving a house like this, they probably don't care. Like, look at the fridge. That's nasty. I don't even know how you live like this, but I mean, the point here is that you have to rely on somebody else to take your property, to own your property, to basically just, you're giving somebody your property and you're telling them, hey, just don't burn it down. And you can just give me
Yeah,
rent and you can do whatever you want in it. And this person is probably not going to give them their $9,000 bill. But I think this is a problem with real estate. You don't own it yourself. You have to give it to someone else so that they can take care of it and then they get to pay you rent for it. Same thing with, let's say, a car rental. You're giving it to someone else, you're using it as cash flow, but you have to rely on them to pay you to take care of it. If they don't, then you're the one who gets screwed. There's also the fact that let's say if somebody burns this house down and people might say, "Oh, insurance is going to pay me." Insurance is going to pay me. How do you know for a fact that insurance is going to pay you? What if insurance chooses not to pay you? They will find reasons not to. right? What if they tell you, hey, you have to go after the person who burned the house down? I don't know exactly what the rules are, but I think this is what really kills real estate. I think this is going to destroy real estate as an asset class for a lot of people because most people are just blindly buying as many houses as they can right now. And they're finally starting to see the downside because over the last 10 years, real estate just kept going up and up and up. It became a paradigm shift for people. It became a brand new paradigm where people used to think that real estate prices can go up and down, but now they see that this is what they're going to be left with if they make the mistake of renting to the wrong person. This is what their house is going to look like after however long. Let's say you leave your house in this person's possession for a year, and this is what you come back to.
Yeah.
You're making like 15, 20K in rent, but now you have to pay $10,000 out of your pocket. You actually lost money.
Yeah. No, that's literally insane. And plus you're losing time because are you gonna go clean that up? Right? Most
Yeah,
of the time, they're not going to. They're gonna try to hire someone else. You're gonna have to
right.
hire someone. They're gonna pay them a good amount of money to go clean that up. Now you're wasting time as well because now you have to try to find a new person to get in there, right? And if they ever see the previous condition that the house was in, they might not be like, oh man, I don't know if I want to, you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
the big issue here is all of the trust involved. Right, this is what
yeah,
Satoshi talked about on the original block, and in the white paper. Right, he talks about how the trust in the central bank is the issue because you're trusting all these different layers of individuals to make the right choices and to not get too greedy. When it comes to real
right.
estate, there are so many different layers of trust, whether it's the tenant, whether it's if you have like a property manager, whether it's the city, whether it's the neighbors. You know what I mean? There's so many layers of trust involved. With Bitcoin, once you hold your own keys, the layers of trust, the trust is on you. The onus is on
Yeah.
you. It's about personal responsibility at that point. So, um, I don't know. How many layers of trust are you comfortable with, So,
Yeah. And I think one of the good things with Bitcoin is that it doesn't hurt anybody. If you just hoard as much as you want to, like let's say Michael Saylor wants to buy 1 million Bitcoin with MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy is already at like 250,000. They want to get up to 1 million. It's not going to hurt anybody. I mean, the price is going to go up, but the price really only impacts people with savings. It doesn't impact everybody in the world. Of course, everybody should have savings at some point. They will have savings, but I think the way that I see it, let's say if Michael Saylor went and bought a ton of real estate, that would have been a problem. If he bought a ton of real estate and then he rented it out to other people, that would have been a massive issue because, of course, that's going to lead to house prices going up. It's going to lead to very likely rental prices going up. And I think that would have probably been a lot worse for millennials, for Gen Z, for Gen Alpha, for anybody in the future than it would be for him to own Bitcoin.
yeah. Yeah. And yes, let's talk about MicroStrategy just a little bit. Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy. Also, shout out to this Twitter community. It's called Irresponsibly Long MicroStrategy. Absolutely insane. Some of the most amazing quants I've ever seen. Their charts are insane. MicroStrategy is really amazing. And what makes it such an interesting investment vehicle is because unlike Bitcoin, which is just a native asset, it's just a commodity, right? MicroStrategy is a cash producing company, right? That also gains some form of yield on their Bitcoin. And they are trading at like a native asset value of like three times Bitcoin. And the amount of Bitcoin that Michael Saylor has, and I know I'm playing devil's advocate, that he's taken away from people is insane. MicroStrategy owns like 19 million people's worth of Bitcoin. If the average person can have 262,000 Satoshis, which I believe is 21 million divided by 8 billion, it's about 260,000. MicroStrategy has like 19 million times the average person's Bitcoin holdings, which is crazy. They are going to have over 1% of the global supply of Bitcoin, which means that they have more than 1% of the global monetary network. All the money on Earth, they will have 1% of it. That's going to be absolutely insane if we actually reach hyper Bitcoinization, which I believe we will.
Yeah. I think so too. So what you see on this website here is a few metrics. So for example, there's the MSTR BTC price ratio. So MSTR is a stock. BTC is of course Bitcoin. If you divide MSTR's stock price by Bitcoin's price, this is what you get. So over time, it's just been going up. So in the beginning, it was at 0.001. Now it's at 0.003. So before 0.001, Bitcoin was equivalent to one share of MSTR. Now, 0.003 Bitcoin is equivalent to one share of MicroStrategy. So over time, the amount of Bitcoin that each share you own is increasing. So uh, let's say you have 10 shares of MicroStrategy. Before it would have been worth 0.01 Bitcoin. Today it's worth 0.03 Bitcoin. So MicroStrategy is outperforming Bitcoin because they can keep borrowing more and more money at very, very cheap rates and they can keep buying Bitcoin with it. And the net asset value premium here, we can see that what MicroStrategy is doing is the amount of Bitcoin that they have is worth a certain amount of money, and the share value is so each share is divided by the total number of shares, the market cap of the company. The market cap of the company, so the value of the company, the amount of I'm just explaining this for my viewers, by the way. The amount that
Yeah,
the
no.
company is worth 2.4 times. So we can see here 2.359, 2.4 times the amount of Bitcoin that they have because the market is predicting that MicroStrategy will keep adding more and more Bitcoin to their balance sheet. They'll be able to keep borrowing more and more money for extremely low rates, and they'll keep being able to buy Bitcoin. And I was doing the calculation on this. I think it's pretty interesting where they have in total something like $5 billion worth of debt today. And if let's say Bitcoin goes to $1 million, and I think it will, I think it'll probably happen within the next decade.
Yeah.
I think it could happen sooner than that, but let's say it happens in the next decade. I think it could happen by the next cycle. But let's say it happens in the next decade. If they roll over their loans, they can literally just sell off 5,000 Bitcoin and pay off their entire debt. And they'll be left at this point, if they don't accumulate anymore, they'll be left with 247,000 Bitcoin. And now they're debt free. That's crazy. That's just absolutely insane.
No, I mean, this is the most insane, most highly productive, most profitable company probably in the world right now. And that's why it's so highly undervalued. And markets are forward looking. When people really start to figure all this stuff out, right? They don't, like Michael Saylor says himself, you don't skate where the puck is, you skate where the puck is going, right? And people are going to skate to where the puck is going. And right now, we are moving towards a system where more and more people are putting more and more in their time and energy into Bitcoin. And the amazing thing about Bitcoin ownership, right? Max Kaiser actually said this. Michael Saylor actually works for me. Michael Saylor's my employee. You know what I mean? That's crazy because every time that he announces that he's buying more Bitcoin, he's feeding into my economic prosperity because we are part of the same monetary network. Absolutely insane stuff. I think that the options on MicroStrategy are going to be insane. Not financial advice, of course. This is just me. I have some that are expiring December 2025. Hopefully peak of the bull run comes a little bit sooner than that. And I think we're just going to see that NAV is just going to keep increasing as they continue to acquire more Bitcoin and acquire more debt to get that Bitcoin. They are literally doing a speculative attack. This is a George Soros trade, right? Against the dollar into Bitcoin. You take on debt in the weak currency and then you buy strong assets, right? You buy the stronger currency. All right. This is the Japanese carry trade, right? The way
It's a
that
carry
the
trade,
United
yeah.
States, yeah, and the yen are linked in that way. You borrow the weak currency, buy the strong one. The debt inflates away, or inflation inflates away your debt, and
Yeah.
it increases the asset that you're holding. The strong currency that you're holding gets stronger. Truly insane.
Yeah.
Like this is really some high level game theory that we're seeing, and I can't wait to see how it plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's wrap up here. We're about an hour in. Any
Yep.
last words for my audience? Any words of wisdom? And then we can go into how they can find you later on.
Yeah. I will say the reason I wore the shirt, I don't know if you can really see it that well, but it says "I
I
told you
told you
so"
so.
with a little Bitcoin in the middle. And this is something Brian Harrington talks about. I know I'm name dropping all these different people. Look them all up, please, and go follow them because they're all great educators. Brian Harrington, he's the guy who made the get to 0.21 Bitcoin as soon as possible. And he made a video called Bitcoin is a never-ending game of I told you so. And I do think the game ends eventually, but as of right now, the game will keep going. And what I mean by that is there's going to be a time where Bitcoin goes up. Right now, we're in the moment where Bitcoin's most likely going to go up, given all the macroeconomic factors and given the game theory of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin's going to go up. I get to say, haha, I told you so. Look at the price. It's so high. There might come a time after the bull run is over, after the hype has gone, and now the things are going to cool down. We might go up to 500K and then crash back down to 100K. That'll be the new low, which is insane to think about. But people will then laugh at me. They'll say, "Ha, I told you so." You know, that thing is never going to be able to become a global asset. You can't get rich holding Bitcoin. Look how much it crashed. It's down 80%. So it is a never-ending game of I told you so. There's going to be some countries that ban it and try to minimize it. I told you so. There are some countries that are going to embrace it and adopt it and push it. I told you so. It's a never-ending game. But if you give yourself enough time in the game, you're going to find that not only are you living in the future because your purchasing power is getting bigger and bigger, it's not shrinking, but also you're finding more people standing next to you instead of against you. So I say just give it time, be humble, truly, and just stack your sats. That's all I can really say.
I think that's really it. I think if you just keep accumulating, you're going to be on the right side of I told you so, which is great. Okay, so just to wrap it up, where can people find you?
You can find me mostly on YouTube at Gen Z BTC. I'm your host, Satoshi Guapamoto, right? Because we're getting all that guap, we're getting good money. All right, Gen Zers, we have to lock in, stack our BTC before it's too late. Same with Gem Alpha. And you can do the same on Twitter, Gen Z BTC. I try to
Nice.
bring a little bit of like a younger kind of like funny vibe to some of my videos, but we're still touching on really important topics. So I'm trying to make a video a day. If you really love hearing about Bitcoin, you can listen to some of my videos. They're more podcast style. So please come on over, Gen Z BTC.
Yeah, I'll include your uh I guess your websites in the description below so people can follow you. Thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. That was great.
Yes. No, dude, thank you so much. This is absolutely insane. And I just want to say, like, all the creators, whether you're small or big, like me, I'm super small. He's a little bit smaller than, well, I'm a little bit smaller than you. All the creators are really, really important because Bitcoin is about education. So thank you so much.
That's it. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. If to my audience, if you do want to follow Jordan, go for it. He's in the description below.